Hello, it's Mark Lanier with your video thought for the day. All right, I'm kind of excited about this week. I'm excited because there's a passage in Romans 5 that's kind of what I call a chain verse. It's one of this here to here to here to here passages. And it starts out in a fantastically weird place, and over the chain takes us to a marvelous end. So I want to talk about that, and what I would like to do, but my problem with chain verses is when I read them in the Bible, I tend to read them real fast. Da, 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 da. And so this week, I'm going to read it real slow because I'm going to take each part of the chain for each day. So today's the first part of the chain. Now let me tell you what the chain begins with. Paul tells the church at Rome to rejoice, count it joyful, in suffering. When you encounter suffering, I mean, that's not a good thing typically. You don't say to someone, hey, I wish you suffering today. May your day be filled with suffering. I mean, it would sound like the Marquis de Sade or something to desire suffering for other people and to take joy in that. And yet here you've got the Apostle Paul, who says to count it joy when you experience suffering. Now, he wasn't wishing suffering on people, but he was recognizing that suffering can be used by God to do some things that otherwise we don't typically have. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about this idea of suffering. By the way, Paul says, count it joy when you experience suffering, because suffering will lead to endurance. And that'll be our word for tomorrow. That's the next link in the chain. But stop on the word suffering. And that's the Greek word thlipsis. Thlipsis is kind of a picture word in some ways. It's like something being under extreme pressure. Like you just feel like it's going to explode, or it's the intensity is so tight. I'm sure at different times in your life you've experienced this. I know that I have. I've experienced it at work when I was a young lawyer. There was a fellow that I worked for who did not think of things the way I did. I was a rather naive young lawyer, and I just thought people were basically good, and what you saw is what you got. And I didn't understand that sometimes people were not all that they appeared to be. And there was a fella I worked with who, let's just say that I learned to relate to this word thlipsis, suffering. I experienced at the hands of a fellow that I worked for some pretty grueling tribulation. And it was really difficult. In fact, I at one point decided I couldn't really be a lawyer. And I thought, I'm just going to quit being a lawyer. I'm going to go do something else, thinking that this was not for me. And so this idea of suffering or tribulation, thlipsis, is one of being under intense pressure. In fact, Jesus uses it in John 16 to talk about how when a woman is pregnant and she gives birth to a child, it's brutally painful, but over time with the child, she forgets all of the pain. And the word that Jesus is using there for the pain of childbirth is this word, thlipsis. It's under pressure, just the intense pain. And so Paul's saying that when we feel under pressure like that, when you feel like your body's going to explode, when you feel like the world is closing in on you, when you feel like you're not up to the task that God has in front of you, when those experiences happen, and they will come. Thlipsis is the same word Jesus used in John 16:33 when he said, in the world you will have tribulation. Thlipsis, suffering. Jesus ends it, but be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. We have times where we suffer. And we need to know when we suffer that we worship a God who will not let any opportunity go by that he can use for our good without using it for our good. And even suffering, living under tribulation and pressure, the pressures of family, the pressures of work, the pressures of school, the pressures of the economy, the pressures of health, all of the pressures that can just make you feel like you're going to explode. Paul says you can rejoice in them because that's going to produce endurance. And by the time we get to the end of the chain, you're going to see why the rejoicing works. But for today, video thought for the day, I'm going to rejoice in suffering, knowing that God's going to bring good out of it in the end. Doesn't mean I like it, doesn't mean I want it, but it means it will not be wasted. Hang on to that, and let's talk again tomorrow.